The observation deck of the Terminus Explorer hung suspended in the absolute void, like a glass eye staring into the face of infinity, its curved, transparent hull offering an unobstructed view of space so distant from any stellar body that the concept of night had become meaningless, replaced instead by a darkness so complete, so total, that it seemed less like the absence of light, and more like the presence of something fundamentally opposed to light's very existence. Dr. Elara Venn pressed her palm against the cool surface of the viewing port, feeling the subtle vibration of the ship's quantum engines humming through the reinforced polymer, and she breathed recycled air that tasted faintly of ozone and the metallic tank of the atmospheric processor's air that had been cycling through the ship's systems for 3 years, or months, and 17 days since they left the last outpost of human civilization at the edge of the Andromeda galaxy. They had traveled farther than any human expedition in history, pushed beyond the cosmic horizon where even the most distant galaxies appeared as faint smudges against the blackness. Beyond the point where the expansion of space itself made communication with Earth a matter of decades rather than hours, into regions of the universe that existed in a kind of existential loneliness that made Elara's chest tighten with an emotion she could quite name, not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it. A recognition that they had ventured into spaces where humanity was not meant to be, where the laws of physics became suggestions and the very fabric of reality grew thin and strange. The ship itself was a masterpiece of 31st century engineering, a vessel designed specifically for this mission of ultimate exploration. Its hull constructed from metamaterials that could withstand gravitational distortions, and its AI systems capable of navigating through regions where conventional spacetime broke down into quantum foam. And yet for all its technological sophistication, the Terminus Explorer felt fragile here, felt like a candle flame flickering in an infinite cathedral of darkness. The crew of 12 moved through the corridors with the careful deliberation of people who understood that they were entirely alone, that no rescue would come if something went wrong, that the nearest human beings were so far away that relativistic time dilation meant everyone they had ever known was likely dead or ancient, transformed by centuries of temporal disconnect into strangers who existed in a future Elara would never see. She could see her reflection in the viewing port superimposed against the darkness beyond, a woman of 43 standard years who looked older. Her dark hair showing streaks of premature gray from the stress of command, her eyes carrying the weight of responsibility for every soul aboard. This vessel, her face gaunt from the mild nutritional deficiencies that inevitably accumulated during ultra-long duration missions, despite the best hydroponic systems, and, behind her reflection, beyond it, the universe stretched out in its terrible vastness, a void punctuated by occasional distant points of light that represented galaxy clusters billions of light-years away. Their light so old that the structures that had emitted it might no longer exist in the present moment, making Elara feel like she was staring not into space, but into time itself, into the deep history of creation. The mission parameters had been clear. Traveled to the theoretical edge of the observable universe, the point beyond which the expansion of space exceeded the speed of light, and made observation impossible, and document what they found there, whether it was simply more universe extending forever or some kind of boundary condition that cosmological models had long predicted but never proven. And now, after 3 years of pushing through the cosmic frontier, after watching the universe thin out around them like a crowd dispersing after some grand cosmic event, they were finally approaching the coordinates that marked the theoretical limit, the point where their models said the universe should simply stop. The first indication that something was fundamentally wrong came not from the visual sensors, but from the quantum displacement detector, an instrument so sensitive it could measure fluctuations in the fabric of spacetime itself. And at 0347 ship time, the detector's readings spiked into the red zone, indicating an impossibility. A region of space ahead of them where the quantum foam that should have been churning and fluctuating at the Planck scale had simply gone still, frozen, dead, in a way that violated every principle of quantum mechanics. Elara was in her quarters when the alert sounded, dragged from a fitful sleep filled with dreams of falling through empty space, and she rushed to the bridge to find her chief science officer, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, staring at the holographic display with an expression of profound confusion, her fingers dancing through the three-dimensional data visualization as if trying to find the error in the readings that would make them make sense. "It's not possible," Yuki said without preamble, her voice tight with the kind of professional distress that comes when your instruments are telling you something that your entire education has taught you cannot be true. The quantum field ahead of us has 0-point energy readings of absolute zero, not close to zero, not approaching zero, but actually zero, which means there's no vacuum fluctuation, no particle-antiparticle pair creation. No Hawking radiation. Nothing. It's like reality itself has just stopped. Elara moved to the display, studying the readings with growing unease, because what Yuki was describing wasn't just unusual or unexpected. It was the kind of thing that suggested either catastrophic instrument failure or a fundamental breakdown in the laws of physics themselves, and they had quadruple-checked every system, run every diagnostic protocol, even sent out probe drones to verify the readings independently, and all of them confirmed the same impossible truth. The navigator commander James Okonkwo initiated a visual sweep with the ship's long-range optical arrays, and what appeared on the main view screen made the entire bridge crew fall silent, made several people gasp audibly, made Elara's carefully maintained professional composure crack just enough for her to whisper a single word: impossible. Where there should have been more darkness, more void, more of the empty space they'd been traveling through for months, there was instead a wall, an actual physical barrier that stretched across their entire field of view, extending infinitely in all directions like a surface with no edges, and it was perfectly, absolutely black. Not the black of empty space where distant light sources provide at least some illumination, but a black so complete that it seemed to absorb the very concept of light, a darkness so profound that looking at it made Elara's eyes hurt as her visual cortex struggled to process something that reflected nothing, emitted nothing, simply existed as a negation of all electromagnetic radiation. They were still 3 million kilometers away from it, but even at this distance, the wall dominated their perception, a flat plane of impenetrable darkness that bisected the universe like a curtain drawn across the stage of creation. And as the ship's AI enhanced the image and corrected for relativistic distortion, they could see that the wall was not rough or textured, but perfectly smooth, a geometric plane so precise that it made human-manufactured surfaces look crude by comparison. The crew began talking all at once, theories and speculation and disbelief mixing into a chaos of voices, until Elara raised her hand for silence and asked the question that everyone was thinking but nobody wanted to voice. What happens if we touch it? The chief engineer, Dr. Alexei Volkov, pulled up schematics on his console and said what they all already knew. Said it anyway because sometimes speaking a fear out loud was the only way to process. The chief engineer, Dr. Alexei Volkov, pulled up schematics on his console and said what they all already knew. Said it anyway because sometimes speaking a fear out loud was the only way to process it. We don't know, Captain. We have no frame of reference for this, no models, no predictions. It shouldn't exist. And the fact that it does exist means that everything we think we understand about cosmology might be wrong, might be fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. Elara made the decision that she had been trained to make, the decision that explorers had been making since the first human looked at a distant horizon and wondered what lay beyond. Prepare to approach slow and steady, full sensor sweep and document everything, because whether this is a natural phenomenon or something else, whether this is the edge of our universe or the beginning of something we could uneven conceptualize, we came here to find the truth, and that truth is 3 million kilometers ahead of us waiting. The approach took 6 days of careful maneuvering, the Terminus Explorer inching forward at velocities that would have seemed absurdly slow to anyone not navigating toward a cosmic anomaly that defied all known physics. And with each passing hour, the wall grew larger in their view screens until it filled their entire visual field, until there was no sky, no space, no universe visible, except that perfect, terrible plane of absolute blackness that seemed to press against their perception, like a weight against their minds. Elara ordered the deployment of their full sensor suite, quantum detectors and gravitational wave receivers, and neutrino telescopes and a dozen other instruments designed to probe the fundamental nature of reality. And every single one of them returned readings that made the science team increasingly agitated, increasingly frightened, because the wall was not just dark but fundamentally inert. It had no temperature, not cold but actually without thermal signature. It had no gravitational field despite clearly having position in space. It absorbed every form of electromagnetic radiation they directed at it without reflection or emission. And most disturbingly, it seemed to exist in a kind of quantum superposition, where it was simultaneously matter and not matter, energy and not energy, present and absent in a way that made the ship's AI crash repeatedly trying to categorize it. They sent probe drones to make direct contact, small autonomous vehicles equipped with every conceivable sensor and sample collection tool, and the entire crew watched on the bridge view screen as the first drone approached the wall's surface. Cameras transmitting live feed until the moment of contact, and then nothing, not an explosion or a flash of light or any dramatic event, but simply cessation. The drone touched the wall and instantly vanished from all sensors. Not destroyed, but erased. removed from existence so completely that even its quantum signature disappeared from the ship's entanglement detectors, as if it had never been built, never been launched, never existed at all. They tried 11 more drones, varying the approach vectors and velocities and sensor configurations, and every single one met the same fate. Touch the wall and cease to be, not destroyed but deleted from reality with a finality that made several crew members physically ill. Made the ship psychologist start scheduling mandatory counseling sessions. Made Elara lie awake in her quarters staring at the ceiling and wondering if they were looking at the edge of existence itself. The point where the simulation ended or where the universe simply ran out of processing power or whatever metaphor you wanted to use for the fundamental terminus of all things. The quantum physicist on their team, Dr. Sarah Chen, proposed a theory that chilled Elara to her core. What if the universe was indeed finite? What if space itself had a boundary, and what they were looking at was not a wall but the absence of anything beyond? A place where the mathematical framework that allowed for existence simply stopped, where the equations that described reality had no solutions, where the concept of space itself became undefined and what appeared to their perception as a black wall was actually their minds trying to render something that was literally nothing. Not empty space but the absence of the dimension of space entirely. They attempted to map the wall's extent, sending probe drones in all directions along its surface, and after 3 days of continuous surveying, they confirmed what their initial scans had suggested. The wall was infinite, or at least extended so far in all directions that it might as well be infinite, curving with the topology of the universe in a way that suggested it was not a wall at all, but a boundary condition, a surface where the inside of the universe met the outside. Except there was no outside, there was only this, only the wall, only the ending. Elara authorized a final experiment, one that several crew members vehemently opposed but that she felt they had to attempt. They would extend a physical tether, a cable of carbon nanofiber, and touch it to the wall's surface while maintaining the connection to the ship, trying to determine if the erasure effect was instantaneous or if there was some kind of transition zone, some gradient of existence to non-existence that they could study and potentially understand. And as the engineering team assembled the equipment and the crew gathered on the bridge to watch, Elara felt the weight of their isolation, their absolute vulnerability, pressing down on her like the gravity of a collapsed star. The tether made contact with the wall at 16:23 ship time, and for exactly 3 seconds, nothing happened. The cable remained intact and visible against the darkness, and then reality inverted, folded, broke apart like a mirror shattering from the inside out. And suddenly, Elara was no longer on the bridge but floating in a space that was not space, surrounded by a presence that was not a presence, and a voice that was not a voice spoke directly into her consciousness with a clarity that bypassed her ears and her neural processing, and seemed to write itself directly onto the fabric of her awareness. You have reached the edge, but the edge is not what you think it is. This is not the boundary of the universe, but the boundary of your perception, the limit of what your particular configuration of consciousness is capable of experiencing. And beyond this wall is not nothing but everything, infinite other universes with different physical constants and different dimensions and different rules. But you cannot perceive them because you are made of this universe. Your atoms sing at this universe's frequency, your thoughts occur in this universe's time, and to cross this boundary would mean becoming something other than what you are, would mean transformation so complete that the you that exists now would cease and something new, something different, something that shares none of your continuity would emerge. Elara wanted to scream, wanted to reject this information, wanted to demand proof or explanation or anything that would make sense of what was happening. But she found herself paralyzed, suspended in this non-place while the presence continued. Your species has a concept called death, the cessation of the pattern that you call consciousness, and this wall represents a kind of cosmic death, not annihilation but transformation, the end of one mode of existence and the beginning of another, and every universe has these walls, these boundaries, where one set of physical laws gives way to another, and they appear as solid barriers to those inside, because to perceive what lies beyond would require being beyond, would require already having undergone the transformation that contact with the wall initiates. She could feel herself fragmenting, feel her sense of self beginning to dissolve like salt in water, and she understood with a terror beyond anything she had ever experienced that she was not having a hallucination, not experiencing some kind of oxygen deprivation dream, but was actually in contact with whatever existed beyond the wall, was actually undergoing the transformation, was actually dying in every meaningful sense, even though her body back on the ship was probably still standing there, still breathing, still technically alive. And then the presence offered her something, a choice that it claimed had been offered to every consciousness that had ever reached this boundary. You can return,